So welcome to District 4, to the point for information and news. I am your host, A-Love. We're going to talk a couple of things. I'm going to tell you some stuff that's up and coming. We are going to cover that A$AP Rocky trial. A$AP Rocky literally in 2021 was now accused because he's not convicted, was accused of shooting really one of his friends that he had for at least 15 years. It's kind of shocking because he didn't ever seem to be with that type of action-based persona. I'll say it that way. No, he wasn't, we didn't picture him as a non-bad boy, for lack of a description. But he seemed to be settled down, and he seems to, have his relationships and his children. And he seemed to be more of a, maybe a part of, that type of bad boy group, but not necessarily as active, in our opinion. More of a glamour guy, no disrespect, but to see that he actually shot at somebody was kind of shocking, actually. It didn't really fit the profile of who he claimed to be, his temperament-wise. But it is there, and for some people, they can see him actually following through with that. The thing about it is not so much the action itself as it is the fact that this friendship, this relationship was so long. And you're hearing the testimony currently, and it's a little bit heartbreaking because you're thinking to yourself, wow, a friendship for that long to end in such a way, or to be disrupted in such a way, it's kind of thought-provoking and a little more in-depth than you would think for a normal trial. Also, just the testimony alone that I've seen so far, it's almost as if the witness, who is actually also the victim, sort of was ambivalent in a sense. They understood the extent of what was happening, but also still had a little bit of a heart for the defendant. You could still feel that inside the witness's testimony. So we'll cover that a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about what's happening with that trial. Also, we will still cover the trial of what they're dubbing the Ponzi scheme murder. I do like this trial just because they've had closing arguments. I think it's interesting in this trial mostly because it's just the concept of the way that the defense attorney sort of approaches things. He's a little abstract, so it's sort of interesting when he was giving his closing argument, how he was talking about, Ponzi scheme, doesn't equal murder, that you can't say, you can say she's a fraud, but you can't say she's a murderer. And I get the concept. I get it. You're basically saying just one thing doesn't equal the other, right? That you may be, morally compromised in one area doesn't necessarily mean you'll go as far as another area. But I don't think it translated well. I think that it came across, in my opinion, it didn't hit. It didn't hit the way that it should have hit on, in this courtroom. And I just feel like the lackluster delivery. This is not to say that the defense didn't have good concepts. It's only to say that the concepts also, your job as an attorney, is to sort of not execute them because it's about the law. We're not talking about showmanship. But we're talking about clarification. You have to clearly state your case, literally, clearly, especially in a closing argument. So if you don't give that level of urgency, if you don't give that level of depth, if you don't clearly translate your concepts, it doesn't mean that it won't work to exonerate your client, but it does mean that it's going to take a lot more deliberation and thought for them as jurors or for the judge to clarify. They have to take that extra step to make clear that they actually understood what you were trying to say. And I feel like that's the case here. I feel like this defense attorney, God bless him, just it didn't hit. It didn't hit. I had to search just listening, and I already know legally what he was trying to do. it didn't hit. And so it was a lot of, with that, giving, in my opinion, the prosecution a greater edge. It just did. I don't know how it will be seen inside the courtroom. I wasn't inside the actual courtroom, but I'm sort of watching these because I wasn't going to do this trial. But I feel like it gave, the clarity was there more so, that you could kind of see the callousness of this defendant and their ability to be able to carry out this crime, which is kind of what the prosecution wraps up is kind of saying. But in real life, the concepts that the defense didn't hit, but they doesn't mean that they weren't reasonable, right? So it's going to take, I feel like, it's going to be mostly deliberating on clarity. It's going to be trying to clarify all of this stuff, trying to sift through all of this stuff, maybe more than you would in a trial that was clear. Basically, that's what it is. Sometimes it boils down to just that. And it's not even going to be persuasive. It's really going to be just legal, because that's all you have left in a case that's not very clear. All right, so we'll cover that a little bit and see what's sentencing and all of these types of things. But I do want to hit some of the top things that are going on in the world today. We say top stories, but it's really going to be focused around a lot of what this administration is doing. Trump's administration, a lot of hit and misses. People are, let's be realistic. Let's start with the border crisis, because I want to talk about that just briefly. I want to take too long on all this, so I'm trying to cover a lot in a short amount of time. I'm going to hit the major ones. The border crisis, first of all, has to be understood that it was a crisis. A lot of people, especially I'm talking to Californians and people that are near particular borders, sort of called it the Mexican crisis. No. I mean, you're almost saying that he was racist against Mexicans. I don't know if that's true or not, but I do know that that's not what the crisis is. The crisis is illegals in the country crisis. So I hear a lot of people saying that, so I'm addressing it for the people that ask me questions, and they were talking about, well, Mexicans this and I said, it's not about Mexicans specifically. It's about illegals in this country, period. Okay, so, and what happened in the Biden administration, as we all know, is that they were not only almost encouraged to come over, but they were given rights while they were here. Now, this is explosive, so I'm telling you ahead of time, everybody's going, oh, you guys are going to send me hate mail, and that's fine. But in real life, okay, if you take your bias out of it, let's remove it. Let's take it out. Let's not judge the situation based on our own personal experiences. If you just look at what's actually happening, when you have a crisis, it means it's out of control. So because the border crisis means that it's out of control, you have to act swiftly and strongly. If you put out a law that says you can't do something, you set a boundary, and you weaken that boundary, it weakens you as a person, right? If I tell you I'm not going to do something and I end up letting you talk me out of it, then I don't seem as strong as I was before. Okay? So when you have a crisis, the crisis is I set a boundary and you ignored it. I'm not going to reward you for that. It's all legal. So just I'm taking out the emotion because everybody's feeling some type of way. Now, I set the boundary, you broken the boundary. I'm going to have to give you stricter rules to let you know not to do it again. So that's basically what's basically happening here. You see some strict laws being sent in. Listen, Biden's stuff, 78 of them were canceled out through executive orders. You see Trump coming in there, and he's already hated. He is a villain. So when you don't like somebody, you're going to look at everything they do and say it's horrible. You don't care what it is. You're going to vilify them. He's already been vilified. So that makes him perfect for this type of situation because he can just do it and it not matter what you think. Okay, what we think is the public. So he goes in, he's laying down the law. He has to in order to control the crisis. Whether you love him or hate him, he cannot allow our country to be weaker by just ignoring the fact that we have a boundary there. So then what do you do once you lay down the law? No, you cannot come over here illegally. It must be legal. Now you have to set in place some consequences for doing so. This is all that is happening. We have turned this personal. We have said, what about people, not all immigrants commit crimes. Not all illegal people are over here to commit a crime. That is probably and exactly correct. But does that mean you don't penalize the ones that are? Guantanamo Bay. That's the new law that came into effect, based on this story of this young lady. The young woman, running, person that's not supposed to be here, he's here illegally, murders her. You use extreme cases when you're trying to say, this is what I'm trying to prevent from happening. So that is laid down. So basically, it's basically saying, you cannot commit a crime over here. You commit a crime over here, whether you're convicted of it or not, you're going into Guantanamo Bay. He put you in Guantanamo Bay. Everybody was mad about, oh, why do they have to go there and blah, blah, blah. Because you can't get out. Because the problem is that when these crimes are committed, even before they're convicted, they can still go home. Will never be heard from again. Okay? So take your emotions out of it. It's not that bad. It sounds terrible, but it has to be that bad because it's a crisis, right? The freeze. Everybody went all, oh, you're freezing. Okay, so this is when you sacrifice some of your own people. Not people meaning racially, but some of the people in the country are getting penalized for the people that were illegally doing stuff. So it's like any business. This is how I describe it. When you're going in, or I go in and I'm like, hey, I need to figure out what's going on in this company. What happened after I left? Let's say you were the executive first. You left. Company went into crisis. You came back, and now you need to regulate things. What is the first thing you do? You check where everybody's money is going. Any executive out there is going to say that's correct. It is true. It's how you turn it around. Right? We have an economic crisis. Let's not forget. Least we forget that was a heavy, heavy thing that we were talking about when we were voting. The economy is in crisis. The border was in crisis. So what are you doing? There's an economic crisis. You go look at the money. He wasn't freezing it for life, forever. It was a freeze in order to see what was going on. He literally said it, but everybody can't stand him to the point where you were just mad that he was just doing anything. And it's a harsh way to approach to take. You could have taken a softer approach. But I think, to the credit of the president, if you want to give him any, he recognized it as a crisis. And I think that's the difference. I think I've been saying that all along. If you look back at my old videos, I wasn't taking anything personal. I didn't have one side or the other. I only reported what was actually happening. I'm doing the same thing here. Emotionally, there's a lot of ways to look at that. But if you look at how to do the actual job itself, and you're in the middle of a crisis, you have to start laying down strict policies and rules in order to control the crisis. And I think that's kind of what is happening here. So that's why the freeze was lifted. And literally, the judge at first put a temporary stop on it, and then the stop was taken off. And then everybody went crazy again, because they wanted to not have this stuff be executed. Also, the executive orders. Everyone went in on the executive orders. They couldn't believe, he was making all these executive orders. But it's what you do when you're trying to turn something around. I think it works for, believe it or not, in this particular case. When you're in a crisis, a villain is the best person to send in, because they can do the tough things without being judged. Or even at this point, caring what you think. Somebody said, well, what about DEI? That affects you as a minority. I was getting some hate mail. I hadn't said anything about that yet. Yes, he made comments about the quality of the airmen. We're talking about the crisis where we had the collision in the air. And he mentioned DEI was sort of the reason. If I were to interpret that, I'm saying if you think that's a problem, you have to hit that up with the problem that there is unfair hiring, right? So if you're saying, oh, it kills the quality, and therefore, hey, that killed the quality, so now we have to think quality-wise. Okay, fine. I agree. But if you're going to say all things considering, and you say we have to worry about the quality, so you're basically saying if all candidates are equal, you have to give the minority the first shot. You see what I'm saying? You have to change it fairly, because both of those are a crisis. Not being hired fairly is a crisis, and quality of the candidate is a crisis. So if you have a problem with that, then you need to modify it. But you must address both issues. I don't have a problem with you saying some of those people shouldn't have been hired because they weren't really of good quality. I agree. I think you should hire the best candidate. But we also have to address the other half. Okay? What do we do when all things are considered and the opposite is usually done? If you're highly qualified, just as qualified as any, we would say white person, right? For example, or any other race, then you have to take into consideration that they may automatically pick the other person. So are you saying they should go the other way? Because we're focused on quality here. So everybody has good quality. When you have all qualified candidates, you have to address the second half. Even qualified, those people weren't getting hired. So that's something to work on if you have a problem with the quality of it. So I didn't have a problem with what he said. I just think he needs to address the issue, and he has to address it fairly. So I'm not going to go way in. I'm trying to answer some of the questions that people were asking me, kind of going in a little bit on some of my thoughts on what was happening. I don't disagree with a lot, and I don't fully agree with it all. But I do think you need to think about it from the country's point of view. I know people hate to say that, but that's what policies are. That's what the law is. It is based on keeping the country strong. And to do that, we have to be safe and secure. We have to have a strong economy, as we always have. And even addressing that, we need a strong army. People get mad. But veterans usually get it the worst a lot of times. And they shouldn't. Because they're there to protect, to defend us, to make sure we're safe. So take that in mind the next time you're, going all in on the people that are there to protect. Okay? You don't have to agree with the military. Many, many years Americans didn't. But you have to at least be reasonable when you say that they're there and they have protected us in the past and they will be needed to protect us in the future. As a country. Now you gotta be looking as a country, because remember, it's not your personal beliefs. It's not your personal feelings. When you're dealing with politics, it's not about emotions. It's about what's best for the country as a whole. Thank you so much. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. I'm not gonna take too much time with this, but I will keep my ear to the to the ceiling, ear to the wall. Somebody correct me on that. I don't know. I'm keeping my ears to the streets. How about that? And I'll see you guys next time.